Okay, so for everybody that's watching in the Ox and Mule chat room right now, we do have a kind of special panel considering we have John Gibbons, we have Alyssa Faden, and then we also have Charles White of Fabled Environments, and it's kind of a art show and a cartography panel at the same time. So Alyssa, I do understand that you are working on a RPG setting known as Torn World. Would you be able to fill us in more about that particular setting?
Yeah, sure, happily so. Ultimately, I'm not going to say that, what I do is any better than what anyone else does. I mean, it's just different. But, I've been role-playing and GMing for my entire life. I'm not going to tell you my age, just Leslie, many decades. And I didn't really like using what other people were doing. I didn't like using their scenarios. I didn't like using the sort of mainstream sort of campaign settings. So I wanted to do my own, which kind of goes hand in hand with the cartography aspect, because then I needed to draw my own maps. And from that was kind of born the Torn World. It's basically my take on a fantasy setting. It's been in development for 20-odd years or so now. I started it in England, brought it across to the US, maybe spanned half a dozen different gaming groups, and each group would say, wow, this is great, this is unique, this is wonderful, you should publish it. So Torn World is it's going to be published next year. It's basically a Pathfinder setting. We might branch out into some other settings. It uses that rule set, I should say. And it's my take on a fantasy world and a fantasy environment. It's a campaign setting, ultimately, and it's got my maps in it.
Awesome, awesome. I like the sound of this already.
It kind of goes hand in hand with the cartography aspect, because it was because of the Torn World I started putting the maps out there just to show friends, and people were going, wow, this is actually pretty good. I was like, really? You like my maps? And like the whole mapping aspect is just like ballooned because of it.
Exactly. All right. And then Charles there, you are with Fabled Environments. Would you have any other information you'd like to divulge about yourself currently? Okay, it does seem we are kind of having a delay here. Well, to keep things going, exactly what kind of style would you say your maps generally go? You do seem, from the work I've reviewed, it does seem to be hand-drawn maps. Would I be correct in saying generally it's a hand-drawn process and then maybe touch-up in, say, Photoshop or a different program? Or are you expanding into digital?
Yeah, you'd actually be bang on the mark. So this is the interesting thing about, I guess, my take on mapping. Like, I mean, I started off in the day where it was pen and paper, okay? I mean, I remember using felt tip pens, for heaven's sake, on a map. But I guess one of the limitations is the minute that you break out the ink pen on paper, the minute you make a mistake, you're screwed. You know, you just can't erase it. There's nothing you can do. So I bought myself, but here's the deal. I started buying also a whole Pro Fantasy line of software, you know, digital. And I used that for years and years and years. And the truth is, you can get really good results. It's really fantastic. It's a great piece of software. Anyone that's interested in developing their own map should seriously look at it. But for me, the minute I started doing maps for other people, they all look the same, if that makes any sense. It's the same artwork, it's the same styles that come out of every single one, no matter who's working on it. And I realized that my hand-drawn look is what people liked, because it's unique, it's got my personality in there. And my personality is really anal. I mean, like little tiny buildings, little tiny trees. I want people to look at my maps and go, wow. Not because it just looks nice, because the colors are pretty, but because it's got that element of insanity in there. So I started going back to my hand-drawn style. I rarely do digital now, but I hand-draw on a Syntec 24-inch. So it's like this big, huge, massive screen. You can just, it's almost like a Wacom tablet, but it's your monitor. And
it's a dream device.
And it's beautiful. I mean, you just basically draw straight on there.
Yeah.
So I'm basically drawing directly in Photoshop, a little bit like John here is, which gives me my hand-drawn look and instant touch-up then, and then I can color it and things like that afterwards. So it's almost like the best of both worlds.
Okay. And it does seem we do have Charles White in the room. It did seem like we had some technical difficulties there. Are you able to hear me there, Charles?
Oh, absolutely. How about me?
Okay.
Hey, Charles.
Hi.
Okay, and I did pose a question to you as well. You are with Fabled Environments. Is there any other information you'd like to share with the audience in regards to what it is you do?
Absolutely. Well, we've been in business for about 10 years now. We started out basically out of just needs that I had for modern maps for games that I was running and playing in. And my wife is actually an interior designer and an architectural drafter. She's been doing that for years, and she doesn't game at all. So that really is an interesting kind of a juxtaposition there. But so when we approach all of our maps, we approach them. She approaches them as if it was just one of her normal projects, if you will, with the exception of all the HVAC and all that kind of happy jazz. But we specialize in modern floor plans. We use AutoCAD, and then everything's moved into PDF, but they're done like floor plans. So we've done a variety of structures at this point and have been nominated for Annies a couple of times and just really had a blast doing it.
Sounds very good, very good. Now, generally, this is going to be a general cartography question as far as, say, making a fantasy map goes, and this is basically up for anybody in the room currently. When you are working on a map, how do you work on the more kind of fantastical, say, geological features of a map, and how would you represent that on a map? Say, something kind of crazy like a floating castle, floating island, those kinds of figures that don't generally work realistically.
Charles, why don't you go first?
We don't do a lot of modern floor plan, modern stuff, or fantasy stuff. So I've seen it done some really interesting ways, but I mean that's more your bailiwick.
I mean, I could have a little shout at that if you don't mind, guys, because the way I've done it in the past, because I've done quite a bit of cartography, is let's say I'm doing a fantasy city, say top-down view, like a standard map. But let's say, for example, somewhere in the middle of the city, you've got some quite elaborate-looking palace or tower structure. That's an odd shape. What I would tend to do is I'd have the top-down view of the map, but then maybe in one corner I would actually do a separate illustration looking at the building from the side. So so the viewer gets an idea. They can see the illustration in the corner, get an idea of what that would look like in real life, and then when they look at the map, the down view of the map, they get the idea of what you were trying to get to.
Okay.
Oh, I've lost people there now. Can't hear people.
I'm still here.
There we go.
Okay.
I missed that completely, guys. I don't know if anyone heard me.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep, we got you. Okay. Yep. So generally on that top-down view, it does seem to be a little bit more harder to render than, say, on a 3D plane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had, it doesn't even have to be a big, huge sort of fantastic floating castle. I mean, if someone said, draw me a floating castle, I think I could potentially put it off because you can do it on a bed of clouds and things like that. But I mean, I've been asked to draw, and strictly speaking, top down now, a gothic town with gargoyles. When you're drawing something where the building is like 5 millimeters along, that's going to be pretty difficult to pull off. I love the side view, the insert side view. I think that can help emphasize elevation. It can help emphasize sort of the multiple levels in an environment, but also architecture, because then you immediately get the side view as well, you know?
Yeah, that's one thing we had to actually play with, kind of the same subject but different time frame. We did an airship, and an airship is full of air. So to be able to understand the structure size, going at it from a side view was better able for folks to visualize the layers of that main structure within the totality of the airship. So, I mean, there are some things that bridge across. That side view can be very valuable when you want to kind of give more detail like that versus just a top-down look too.
I completely agree with that. In fact, one of my favorite projects is actually working on deck plans, but doing it with real ships, real sailing ships, and or something of the middle sort of 16th century era, the cogs and carracks and that type of thing. Not just doing a generic pirate ship, in other words. But if you just do top down, of course, you got all of the decks and everything, and it's pretty good. You get a good sort of feel for what it's about. But the minute you add that side view as well, it just all kind of pulls together.
No, exactly. Especially in something like that, because I think something that has a historical basis, there's even more of a craving, I think, in some respects, to get a better handle on perspective. So, because it is very difficult sometimes, we kind of tend to put what we view from a modern perspective with size versus what is actually size. Say, for example, in small sailing ships, which were large then, but may not necessarily equate to what we consider large with our supertankers and large ships that we have now. So.
Okay, excellent. Currently, I do have a question from the audience here. What are some of the things you take into account when placing population centers on continental maps, and how can you use said placement to tell the history of said continent?
Good question.
Should I take that one? Sure. Okay, so that's a really good question. I like that question. So it may sound like it's a really complex question, but the way I tend to tackle things like that is if you just strip the land bare for a moment and just think about who would settle for this first time, and why would they settle, and what would they look for. It could be just a family in a car heading across country, and they decide that they're going to just put down somewhere. Why would anyone else then settle next to them, and why would a population grow from that into a village or into a town and so on and so forth? You start thinking in terms of, well, there would have to be some kind of fresh water source. That's the very first thing. There would have to be potentially, some good land around here. Maybe a defensible position if that was the motivation. There would have to be, for there then to be growth. Maybe it is on some kind of trade route. Maybe there's a reason why other people would come through this spot. And when you start thinking in terms like that, you start naturally looking at rivers and along estuaries, on coastlines. And this is where you start placing those initial sort of population centers. It starts to flow naturally from that point of view.
Yeah, those elements too also impact the settlement security. For example, if I do have a river, if I do have a mountainous area around me, and I'm in a valley, I mean, there is a certain level of security. But also, if you tend to settle on a plain area, for example, and I've talked about this in world building before, where are you the crossroads of all activity? Well, it may be that it was an easy transition point for a group of people. It's easy to travel to there. You have resources. That could also be a potential draw for other people that want your stuff, if you will. So that can also impact the history of the folks in that region. So, and it also, I mean, going into we talked about this from a different perspective, which is very interesting, is taking a look at the map. You can also somewhat predict what their religious pantheon may look like. If you're an isolated seacoast area, well, guess what you're going to have? So a lot of those build on the history and the culture as well. I mean, it's a huge impact, just where you place somebody on a map.
You know, and you touch on something that's really interesting. I mean, and one thing that I do is I don't approach my map like it's a map, and that may sound crazy, okay? Don't think about it in terms of a map. Don't think about it in terms of just a picture of any form. It's a story. It's just another way of telling a story, right? And one thing that was just touched on there is, you know, pantheons and things like that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're telling the story about this land. And you've got to start thinking in terms of who lives here. What do they care about? Not only what do they worship, but who is the neighbor? And are they friendly or not?
Sure.
And if they're not friendly, then there's probably going to be more of a defensive or even offensive stance, and you're going to start getting your castles and things like that sort of cropping up. But you've got to really understand who's in this country or who's in this province and who's in this continent and who's around them, and start thinking of it just like you were drafting out the story for a book, and you'll find that you'll start placing you know, structures, you'll start placing towns in response to how the people would live, and it will start to flow, you know. And if you want to put a city in the middle of a plain, you can, but then you got to kind of reverse engineer it. Why is it in the middle of this plain? And you'll start adding things to the map to support that story that you've got to come up with.
Yeah, I think you just hit like you said, you hit an important point when you talk about any type of a structure, whether it's a small scale structure like we do, or when you're talking, especially when you're talking about cartography, though, is the question of why. Why is a big one. You know, like, why did we settle here? Why did they put a castle there? Why did the culture expand out the way it did? What caused that? And I think the why is a huge issue. Unfortunately, sometimes we just simply see the what. I want a town and I want it here, versus letting the map and the topography kind of dictate and tell that story. I think that's a brilliant way of looking at it.
And you know, it's really funny. It's almost like, I think, especially within our industry, or within the gaming sort of genre, I should say, people, even if they're not map experts and topography experts and geology experts, the human eye kind of knows something if it's out of whack. You know, if I drew a square continent, I'm going to guarantee that a lot of people are going to go, "Ooh, that's kind of unusual." And it's the same for anything. I mean, I drew a city recently, and there was no obvious form of fresh water in there. Now, I draw little springs within it. I knew the story behind it. And in fact, you know, I know this is kind of going a little bit more granular than maybe the question indicated. But, you know, basically, the story of this city was, okay, there's a simple motte and bailey, and they were next to a freshwater source. I drew the motte and bailey first. I drew the source then, and expanded the city from there. But the thing is, it wasn't immediately obvious that this was a freshwater source. So, and people picked up on it immediately. It's like, so this is a great city, and it looks awesome, but how did it get here? And so you've got to have that explained, you know?
Okay, I do have to say that was actually rather interesting insight there. Actually, since you did bring up that the human eye does kind of notice when something's off kilter when you do look at a geological feature. Let's see, one of the more interesting map ideas I had was a continent of mine. Well, the rivers, of course, were going from north to south like any other river would, though this continent was split in half. And at first it was like, okay, so this is just fantasy, this is going to work out. But then it comes across the question of, if I have essentially a Grand Canyon between the half of this continent, how is the major river going to reach from the north half to the south half? And then things fell apart. How do you generally avoid situations like that while drawing, other than coming up with a rationalization, at least as far on the drawing aspect?
Charles, I'm doing a lot of talking here. Why don't you jump in on this one?
Repeat that for me if you would. Sorry, my mind just wandered for a second. I apologize.
Oh yeah, no worries. So essentially, what I was posing there and giving an example of was the human eye does seem to notice when you do look at, say, a map of geological features, if something's off kilter, like say you have a continent that has a canyon running all the way through it, and then you have, say, rivers going from the north to the south half of that continent, you immediately start wondering, how is that even possible realistically, let alone in a fantasy setting? How do you kind of rectify that on the drawing aspect?
Well, I mean, I think it's funny when we talk the term realistic and fantasy in the same breath, but I mean, yeah, I understand what you're trying to say. I also realize that there are some really, really bizarre things that you find in nature. What's the old adage that the truth is probably stranger than fiction? So some of that you're going to notice, and maybe you can explain, but I don't think it's so far out of the realm of possibility for doing some strange features. That there are some things that will never happen, typically, but I mean, you've got mountainous terrain right on a coastline. I mean, you've got all kinds of crazy stuff like that that you can pair together. But I mean, generally speaking, there's a difference between potentially representing reality and then trying to create a map that's playable and try to create a map that people feel comfortable with as well. I didn't even come close to answering your question, I know, but
no, that actually works out just fine.
Okay, but I mean that's kind of, I mean, when I've approached, as far as, and I approach this from the aspect of world building when I look at it versus actually creating the maps. I mean, that's sometimes those weird, crazy features that people look at and go, how is that possible? Adds some depth and some character to what you're talking about too. I mean, it's got to be within the realm of possibility, but still, those strange topographical features can really do some interesting things. And going back to the issue of story, those can really do some cool things to the story you're telling too, because the people that settle there may find something that's very strong as a draw, and then something else that they look at and go, but this is going to be a huge obstacle, and how do they process that? That can really add some good drama to the history of that area.
And you know, it's funny, but occasionally, because obviously I work on commission, occasionally I'll have a client ask me to do something that it's just by all rights is impossible. You know, a river that flows uphill, or goes along the top of a hill and doesn't immediately sort of try to find lower ground. And these things sort of, they're really hard to draw because I want to bend them. You know, I don't want it to be magic that makes this thing work. But a couple of things that I've learned to do, if I really must have a river that goes uphill, if I really must have a river that goes along the top of a mountain range, then you know, you can just embrace it, fully embrace it. You can always try to add little things, like surrounding sort of areas of height that keep that river flowing, you know, in the right direction, but also subtle things like labeling. Outright label it in such a way that it's obvious that it's either man-made or it has magical influence or something like that, you know. Call it the Canal of DB or whatever, but now it's a canal, now it's man-made, and now people will start to get it, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Alyssa, that you can add some elements that would help explain why you've got this crazy geographical feature. Usually there's, I mean, I guess not always, and it sounds like you've experienced these, but it seems like there is, and we've done this too, I mean, different perspective, but there are times when you've got a client and they've got expectation, and then you're looking at it from the fact that you're trying to create something that's somewhat practical, somewhat usable, not somewhat, but definitely usable. And you've got to merge those two things, so the result may be a compromise that says, I want a river that flows uphill, or I want a river that flows around a mountain. What does that look like? And then coming up with the terrain that surrounds it to support that. I mean, that's part of that. It's got to be part of that creative process too, of pairing the needs of the people that have asked you to commission for this map, and the need to create a product that really is good quality and really just doesn't kind of throw the rules of science, if you will, out the window at the same time.
That's actually got to be, you know, I want to almost say that's got to be harder in your world in some ways. I mean, I know that in my world there's a tendency for people to sort of say, yeah, I want a river that goes uphill because it's magic. But it's kind of almost less of it. There's almost an expectation, I think, from my particular audience for there to be a level of realism. Let's call it the high fantasy sort of era. But yours, I mean, you're dealing in the modern world, and the modern world can do some weird things visually on a map.
Well, and the other thing too is that there are laws that are very strong when we talk about it from a modern perspective. I mean, you're talking about somebody that's an interior designer that knows how buildings are built, and you know, her training is such. I don't know how many people know this, but I believe it's under 10,000 square feet that she could actually do everything and just have an engineer sign off on plans. So she's very cognizant of how these structures should look. Now, that being said, we've had some really wacky questions. I want this to look like this, I want this, and then you have to go back and say, there is nobody in their right mind that would build it this way. How about we do it this way? We've had lots of discussions with folks about that, where you have to come to a compromise to create a structure that works. And of course, the good thing we've got that you don't always have is that we can actually go to source documents. You know, when you're talking about 16th century, that's great, but fantasy, we can go to source documents and look at different examples. For example, a jet. I can look at basic design patterns for jets. A little bit more difficult when you're talking about certain features and certain things in a more of a fantasy world. So, I mean, that's good for us. We've got that tool that we can draw from that folks that are dealing in that fantasy world, and even sci-fi, may not necessarily have available to them.
Okay, and that was actually quite a decent amount of input there, so I do thank you two for conversing so much about that topic. I do have another audience question here. How do prevailing weather patterns play into it? What are some of the common things that folks tend to overlook in this regard for continental maps? Going along with that, I'd also say maybe the current patterns as well for oceans, seas, like those kind of weather and sea patterns.
You know, that is really getting into some. That's a really great question, and that's deep. I don't know who asked that question, but clearly they're taking this really seriously. A couple of things, I suppose, on that. You know, when we start getting into weather patterns, ocean currents, you know, let's just throw in there as well the age of the world. I mean, we're thinking like gods at this point, right? Is this a young world where that is, you know, it has a very jagged topography to it? Is this an ancient world where everything's kind of been smoothed out a little bit? So start thinking in terms of let's come in big first. You know, how jagged, let's just call it. Do I want my topography here? And then when you start thinking, let's zoom in just a little bit more. And when let's say that you've drawn yourself a country and you put down your mountains and you've decided that it's going to be Earth-like, and you know there's going to be some that are tall and jagged and low-lying foothills. I start thinking then in terms of weather patterns, and I do that because you know the placement of, in fact, you know, I've got to zoom back out again, really. How many suns does this have? How close to the sun is it? How hot is this world? Does it have an equator that's equivalent to Earth's equator, or does it run on a different angle, right? That will start to give you an idea of where your hot band is going to be in the world, if there is one, and are there going to be cold bands? Some worlds may not have it. Some worlds, I mean, if it's going to be sort of fairly evenly set against the sort of central sun, might be, you know, a lot more even than the Earth is. That will start to indicate where you're going to start placing your main areas of a lot of water, your rivers, your desert regions, of course. And then that, in turn, starts to lead into the weather patterns. I then start to sort of zoom in, and I start thinking in terms of, well, you know, the rain's going to start falling mostly on this side of the mountain. And it's not a desert region, so that means it's going to be way more waterfall on that side. So this is probably going to be where my swamps are. This is going to be my rivers are. This is going to be where my greenery is. This is going to be where my jungles and my forests are going to be. On the other side, it's probably going to be a little bit less. I abstract it a little bit. I mean, I'm certainly no scientist, but it starts to create this sort of believable flow to literally where all of the vegetation is, where the deserts are. But you can't just look at weather patterns. You know, weather patterns are you know, influenced by many things, but there's obviously a lot more that comes into play on it. I don't know if you want to jump in here. I'm happy to keep on talking, Charles.
I just stepped away for a second, so yeah, it is an interesting component. I wonder, like you said earlier, I wonder how many people actually take that into account. I mean, if you design a map with all those elements in place, you know, God bless you. That is a huge amount of stuff. You're talking about meteorological patterns and how they act and react. I mean, you're going to have certain things you can throw in there. For example, if you're creating an island nation and you have shoals, you are going to have some tidal patterns that could negatively impact shipping, things like that. But I wonder if that's a level of detail that players, I mean, I'm sure somebody looks at it, but generally speaking, I wonder how much that they get into that level of detail, because that is pretty intense. But I think, you know, looking at like you said earlier, Alyssa, how close are they to the sun, things like that do have a direct impact, and you can see the landscape because you may have a different type of vegetation level, so consequently you may be talking plains versus forest or vice versa. You may be talking deserts versus vegetated areas, so that could be interesting, especially if you're looking at a fantasy setting that has more of a desert feel maybe throughout, where water is scarce. You are going to have to take into account some of that as well. You may have longer days. Who knows? But I would say that's going to be more at a high level than necessarily really diving into the whole issue of meteorological patterns and things.
I think, just 1 minute, guys. I think when you're looking at creating maps for worlds as well, especially maps that are going to be used in, say, a fantasy setting, you know, from a DM's point of view and a gaming point of view, you want to have quite varied terrain, because obviously you're going to have varied adventures. If you're going to run a long-term campaign, you might want, say, a few sessions set in like icy wastes, other sessions set in cold mountains or deserts. And I think if you try to do it too realistic, for a start, I mean, you know, travel time. I mean, to get, you know, if you set it in our world, for example, you know, to get between here and, say, you know, an Arctic terrain or Arctic tundra, you'd be looking at months and months of travel, you know, in a fantasy setting. So I think you have to be a little bit blasé slightly on the way that you set up the various ecologies on your map, because you have to base it a little bit around the fact that you are playing a game, and there's got to be some level of enjoyment around it rather than being too factual.
And you know, I kind of almost want to jump in on this with two different opposing points of view, and I actually use them both. On one hand, I was on the phone once with the British astronomical president, talking to him about a binary star system, because I wanted to understand the influence that it would have on a world. Yeah. That's pretty detailed stuff. And the result that came out of it was really, really detailed, and no player ever saw it. But, you know, I liked it, and it helped me understand, you know, the angle of the suns and how big they were and what color they would be, and so on and so forth. And when you add a binary moon system, imagine the havoc that that plays on the tides. And, you know, there are some people that get off on that. They really want to know the math behind that. They want to know the science behind it. And they want to know that things are working, right? And if you take this into the future, I mean, we're talking fantasy here, but let's face it, there's science fiction as well. There's that market. Those people want to know that it works. So I think you've got to at least think about it. And then on the other side, though, like John was saying, I mean, how detailed do you get? So I think, too, that you can bear in mind that even in our real world, there will be an oasis in the middle of a desert. There are valleys of green in the middle of a desert. It's almost like our very real world breaks the rules just all of the time, you know. So fall somewhere in between. Think about it. You've got to think about it. And sure, if your players really get off on reams and reams of math and science, then do it. Work on that. But also make it playable. It's got to be fun to be in, I suppose.
Okay. And wow, this is actually probably one of the more interesting conversations I've gotten into lately. To be 100% honest here, I've been loving this panel. I do have another audience question here. How do you figure what the coastlines look for a new world? And I'm supposing, as you were saying earlier, how a new world would probably be more jagged than smoothed out by erosion and whatnot. It does seem this guy is figuring or attempting to find out what coastlines would look like on a.
Well, what I mean is like the basic shape of the coastline. You know, like you know, Africa has this big part on top and then gets narrower at the bottom, and you know, the Mediterranean Sea has a boot of Italy sticking into it. The bays, where the bays and the peninsulas and the fjords and of course, obviously we're going to be north, but. You know, what do the continents? What is the shape of the continents? The shape of the continents is what I was thinking about. That's always a tough one for me.
That's a really interesting question because it in many respects, it's. I mean, at least for my thought process, you're really. I almost get into a chicken before the egg situation here. Why do I say that? Well, if I have a world that's island-based, you've got that, but also, what am I trying to say? Sorry, I'm rambling. But basically, it varies. It's funny because it goes back to the issue of, do you create a map and then tell a story based on the map, or there is a time, I'm sure, where you could create a map to tell the story you're trying to tell. And with that in mind, if you had more of an isolated people, would they be on a peninsula? Would there be more island areas? So the shape of the coastline could be affected by that. It could be affected by so many different things. You know, I've even seen maps that have been created where the area has been created to resemble something, and that may send a tone within the adventure as well, or the campaign. How do you go about it, Alyssa?
You know, and it is a good question, and I think you touched on some really good points there. You know, if I'm going to draw a world, and indeed I have drawn a few. Yeah, well, the first question has got to be, you know, sort of, do I want this to be sort of heavily water, or do I want it to be heavily land? That's the first thing. How much land dominance do I want here? And then, honestly, and it's not cheating, but I'm going to call it cheat. Look at the real world. Look at our world. Okay, this is literally 25 plus years ago. This is what I did. I've got so many atlases. I've got books just on island shapes alone, and I would look at real coastlines, and it's amazing. I mean, the modern world that we've got today, the number of times that I've actually brought up like Google Earth or just Google Maps and zoomed in on a coastline. I even zoomed in on the Oregon coastline. I currently live in Oregon, and I just zoomed in on the west coast there, and the shape of that coastline, the little bays, the little peninsulas, it was inspirational, and it's right there in front of me. And copy it. Just copy it. Find a section of the coastline in the world that you really like, and if it turns you on, if you like it, take it. Just trace it, copy it, take the spirit of that, right?
I was going to ask how to avoid copying it. I know I've done copying in the past, and sometimes you don't want to make everything a copy of what already exists. In fact, I've even taken like the 1,000-foot contour line near Iowa and copied that. But sometimes you want to.
No, totally. And in fact, once I even copied some islands and I turned them upside down, thinking I'd got away with it. And it was actually my boyfriend. He looked at it and went, "Oh yeah, okay, there's Hawaii." I went, okay. Okay, I didn't quite get away with that one. But no, you can't copy it, but the point is, take the spirit of it, right? I mean, there are sections of coastline in the world that looks like a giant has just taken bites out of it. So you can do that and it will be interesting. While there are other sections that are long and smooth, but you'll see these little dotted islands, quite close. Do that, and you're going to be in the realm of what is believable and what is plausible. But also bear in mind one thing that we've not spoken about is remember that this is all basically continents. It's platonic, so right? The continents drifting and moving together. They're broken apart. Basically, take all of the water away. Your world is just a series of mountain peaks at the end of the day, and flow them that way. Imagine that you've got two mountainous land masses, forget the water, that break apart, that shear apart and move away from each other. If you create a shape in areas that looks like they could slot back together again, almost like a jigsaw puzzle, even in an abstract way, you'll have this sense that there's been some age in the world, that there are plates underneath the oceans moving. And that's one of the things I'll do. If you look at some of my coastlines, you'll see I've got little islands even that look like they could just slot in, a little bit closer. Or there'll be a dotted row of islands, and you could almost imagine that if you took the water away, it's little mountain peaks. If you do that and all of that, basically I was just looking at the real world, and how it does it. I mean, if you just look at the whole Greece, look at the Mediterranean area, look at the islands there, look at the islands around like Santorini, for instance. I mean, that is such an inspirational area. You don't have to copy it, but if you look at it and you get inspiration from it, that is then what I draw on paper.
Okay. And this was actually, I gotta say, by far, this has probably been one of my most favorite panels that I've actually have moderated. And I gotta say, I'm beyond inspired by all the information you've shared with us today. Unfortunately, though, it does look like we've actually ran overtime by about a minute or so, so I'm unfortunately going to have to steal Charles away for his How to Create a Pantheon panel.
It's been a blast. I mean, this has been a great panel. It's been great to be able to talk with everybody and actually kind of meet Alyssa. We've talked on Facebook, so that's been great. So I appreciate the opportunity. Just very quickly, I'm sure Alyssa and John would appreciate this. You can find our stuff on RPG Now through Fabled Environments or through our website, fabledenvironments.com. Alyssa, where can they find you?
My main haunt is actually on Facebook, the Cartography of Alyssa Faden. I would encourage everyone to come over there and hang out. I consider all of you to be great friends, and I love talking to all of you and sharing our mapping stories.
Sounds good, sounds good. I'm definitely dropping by all of you guys.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Indeed, and thank you. And for everyone that is watching live through AetherCon, Charles here is going to be on a panel within the next few minutes. Checking my actual statistics here. Yes, create a pantheon, and we will start that one live in just a few minutes. Alyssa, are you just going to hang around with John Gibbons here?
Yeah, I'm probably going to loiter in John's booth, I think.
All right. Yes, so everybody, if you want to talk to Alyssa or John here, who we've graciously taken some of his airtime, just
That's fine, guys. That's fine. I've been listening. It's been interesting.
Indeed. So we are going to switch to a different channel for Charles's panel. However, these two are live in this booth right now, if you wish to speak with any further questions. And thank you.
Thanks. Eric, I assume for practical purposes I need to get out of this booth.
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay. Shoot.
Yeah.
It's been fun. Thanks, guys.
Indeed. Thank
Great
you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So you've just been literally hanging out in this booth here and
Yeah,
drawing this.
just listening to you guys talking about maps.
You know, I should do this next year. I should totally get a setup like you've got going here and just draw a map.
Well, that's the thing is, see, I'm also the art director for AetherCon, and one thing I did say at the time was it'd be great to have maybe a couple of booths for cartographers, because there's no reason why not, you know, and you know people need maps for the games, and I think it would probably do quite well.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny. I mean, I'm going to be a Gary Con, I'm going to be a Dwarf Con, I'm going to have booths at them. Why would I not have a booth here as well?
Yeah, precisely, yeah.
Especially, I mean, this whole live thing that you've got going on, you're basically just drawing. People can come in, they can talk to you, they can see what you're doing. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's been a bit quiet, but I think, like I say, I think it's because the very first convention, the first one we've done. So, I mean, this is my last stint. I had technical errors on the Friday, and I just couldn't do it. It just kept on kicking me out. Yesterday worked okay, but I had no visitors. So today, you know, just having a few people to sort of talk to is quite nice. It gets very lonely for 3 hours here.
Hi.
Hey, Stephen. You okay, mate?
Yeah. Yeah, he did mention maps, and I'm sort of the guy who's sitting behind the desk, I guess, if you want to call it. I hesitate to put myself on any kind of a pedestal because I hate that kind of stuff. He knows that too, but I thought that the reason we didn't have that basically was because I thought we were almost overreaching a little bit with what we did have, and
yeah.
it was just basically, boy, geez, do I want to? Because I had writers who wanted to say, you should have a writer's nook in here. And you should have this, and other people saying, well, you should have that in here, and you should have this in here. I'm thinking, you're right, all that stuff's out of Real Life Con, but this is the first bloody time I've ever done this kind of a thing, and boy, I mean, you can see not everything turned out exactly the way we wanted it to. I mean, there's definitely changes that have to be made, to the vendors section especially. I mean, we did not get the result we wanted there, so we definitely have to, revamp that. And I mean, it's just like, boy, we've got these 5 things, and boy, if we add any more, I mean, this is almost too much to begin with. But I mean, I'm not saying that, gee, maps are a bad idea, because I love your work, I really do. I think it's great. But it's just like, I want to make sure we do these 5 things well first.
Yeah.
And. I mean, for all I know, we may actually drop the tournaments next year. We don't know that yet.
Yeah.
Because we had such things just did not go right there for us, and who knows? But this is I would definitely like to have you in our event. It's just a matter of figuring out how, and if we have the people behind the scenes to make sure that things work.
I think having more technical guys on duty would help a lot. I think, Stephen, don't you?
Well, we've already got a guy to be the technical advisor for the the Artist Enclave. We have that. Yeah. We found that guy a couple days ago, Ian Landis.
Yeah. Okay,
so he's gonna do that for next year.
Yeah.
And we're happy with that. He's got 10 years experience in this kind of a thing. So, I'm just gonna follow his lead, because I mean, John knows I'm not a tech monkey. I don't know this kind of stuff. So But no, I mean, right now, I'm just worried about getting through the day and having an after, getting a few days of sleep and then having an after meeting.
Yeah.
And once that happens, we can look at stuff. But yeah, I mean, as you can tell, I'm very interested in this kind of thing. Not that I have any talent at all whatsoever, but I am interested in it. In any case, I just want to make sure Alyssa, that you understand we do want to make some kind of a place. One thing I was discussing with a couple of the artists just in the last couple of days was possibly having a speed painting duel-off, sort of like over the weekend, sort of like playoff hockey, where two guys go and they do a 20-minute deal, and then you can vote for it. And then two guys go 20-minute deal, and you can vote for it, or two artists, and you go down the grid, and then those that advance go into the next day, and then maybe on the Sunday you do like maybe 2 or 3 rounds to get that, say, from 8 to 4 to 2, right?
Yeah,
that kind of a thing over the weekend. Depends how many artists there are, depends how many want to do it. But so far, that's something that has been greeted with some enthusiasm. They don't, it's not an idea that they're quashing. Oh God, that's horrible. They do like the idea. So, and that's something that's going to get discussed at the after meeting. And among other, there's just a lot of things that need to be hashed out.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, definitely.
That guy there, Dave Lehman, he's gonna help us out next year as well. He jumped on in the clutch, and he's been very good for us, and we're happy to have him.
Good stuff. Good stuff. You need to pack up your smoking, mister.
Yes, I do. I've been smoking since I was 8 years old. I understand that when I die, it's going to be with a cigarette in my mouth and a pack in my pocket. But at least I know how I'm going to die, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have so many artists here. You don't have to have a white one. You can have a different color one. They can do something abstract for you. Maybe we could speed paint Story Dragon. Anyway, I'm just gonna check. Oh, Patrick McAvoy's near. I gotta hook him up.
No problem.
Copy. Hook.
John, I'm out of here, man. I've got a gym to go to.
Oh, no problem at all. It's nice to meet you.
And you too. You too.
I'll try and stay in touch with you regarding this. I really appreciate you coming on today.
I wish I'd been just more available to you. It's been a blast.
Okay. You have a good one, ma'am.
You bye.
So how's it going, John?
Not too bad, mate. Not too bad. It's been a bit quiet.
Yeah.
But it's been, it's a learning curve, isn't it? That's what I keep saying to myself,
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Nothing's going to go exactly right the first time, and it does bother me somewhat, some of the flack we're taking, because I do feel a lot of it is undeserved.
Are you getting some flack? Are you getting flack? Yeah.
Well, I'm getting flack for the con is not. Well, yeah, me personally.
Yeah.
Are getting flack for political reasons.
All right. Okay.
I'm all over people who give me, who say, you know what, this can be improved.
Yeah.
And this is what I was. But I mean, Henry Ford said, look, anybody can complain. Not it's the people who can offer you a solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's one particular group of people out there who are doing their utmost.
Really?
And it's just, I'm going, really? Is that your play?
It's a bit silly, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I've been catching up. I mean, the past couple of days, I've been trying to make sure I've been online as much as I can. So I've been helping out the artists and trying to get the booths sorted out. Some of them have not been able to follow basic instructions. It's like, Stephen,
There's one. Sorry, go ahead.
It's kind of like, how many times they get told that, send your chat link, your link to the chat room, and they've been sending it to me, and I've had to go online. But, and I do think some of the artists, it's a shame, because there's been quite a few who've just not been able to get anything to work due to technical problems, which is a damn shame. But it is what it is, and like I say, I'm getting feedback off the artists who've been able to sort of participate, and I'm going to try and get that together. Then in the after show meeting, I can obviously raise a few concerns and a few suggestions for next year. It's the way forward.
Yeah. There is one thing I did want to approach you about, and that is the one thing we're having a really hard time with, you and I especially, is communication.
Yeah.
Because you're 5 hours behind me and you're a really busy guy.
Yeah, no, it's difficult.
So this is what I was thinking, is if we could have like an art director for the con, and then have you be his liaison over in Europe.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So that, basically you take care of things over there, and then you touch base with that guy, the girl, whoever it may be, right, who would be North America based, and so they would bundle all that together, and then when I needed a report, I could just grab it from them rather than try to have to track you down.
Yeah.
And it's because that's a real strain on both of our schedules.
Yeah. No, I've got no problem with that at all, Stephen. That's fine, mate. Because it does. It has become a bit frustrating because of the time difference, and ultimately, even though. Because it's an online convention, even though it doesn't matter what time zone you're in, ultimately it does. Ultimately, we know that probably 80-90% of the visitors and people taking part are stateside.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does have its limitations.
I mean that's one of the things. You've got to be kidding me! Yeah. Go to the mule and recruit. This guy came in with a full table reserved.
Yeah.
Call of Cthulhu, full table. One guy showed.
Oh, God.
I mean, what do you do in that situation?
There's not much you can do, is there?
And it looks like it's egg on our faces. You canceled the game. Why'd you do that? Well, dude, we had 6 people in that game who said they were going to play it. Right? What are we supposed to do? Go to their houses and like root them out of bed and
Yeah, there's not much you can do, is there? There's not much you can do. I think it's for me. It's the little things. It's just like for example your website. There's things that we could probably do that make it easier for people to navigate on the day. I know that a lot of people have said, for example, the artist booths. Obviously, you don't know someone's actually in there until you try to join a hangout, and then it either says no one's here, or you get access. And it might be interesting to have a little button that lights.
They do have rollover links telling you when they're in there.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's why you put those in. I can understand that to some extent, but I mean, there are just some things that are beyond me technically.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the first year I've worked with Dreamweaver, and I'll tell you, like right now, I fully intend to turn the website over to John Felber, who does this for a living.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. And John came into the game probably, I'd say, July, Augusty. Right. And so, I mean, and he's in his last year of school, right? And so I imagine, like, once that ends, then he may have a bit more time. And saying he's the guy who did the layout on the convention program.
Oh, right, okay.
Those are going to be the 2 things he does.
Yeah.
The website and the layout of the convention program. Well, yeah, I mean, The Serenity guy said, well, I've only got 2 players for my game, and the COC guy, I've only got 1, but he wants to join your game. That's good. Get a free table. Get an active table going. That's fine. I don't care what game it is.
So how's the game been going on in general? Has it been pretty successful, do you think?
Say that again. I didn't catch the entire question.
How's the gaming section been? Has it been pretty successful?
No, it's been abysmal.
Has it really?
Yeah, because the reason it's been abysmal is because, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, not enough people took us seriously enough soon enough.
Yeah.
Okay? They all made these wild promises. Yeah, I'll join this game. Sure, I'll run that game. Fully expecting that we'd never make it here. Right? They figured, sure, why not? I'll tell him and he'll feel good, and by the time Oz comes around, it'll have collapsed and I'll have lost nothing.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Right? And so day of, now all of a sudden it's well, shit, I actually have to write something for this. I can't do that. What do you mean I have to show up to play this game? I've already made plans. Because they never expected us to be here.
Yeah.
Right? And that's probably on me. Okay? Nobody knows me from Adam. I'm not backed by anybody. We're doing this for free. We have no operating budget. Right? How successful can we be?
Yeah.
Right? I'm not even a professional anything. Right? If I can't even say, well, I'm a professional graphic designer or I'm a professional, I can't even say that because I'm not. Right? So no one expected us to be here. I know this.
Yeah.
And by the time they figured out that, hey, they may actually pull this off, it was way too late in the game. Okay? Like, the folks that are hammering us, the trolls,
yeah,
they're from Skirmisher Publishing.
Really?
Okay? They had a booth. They had a panel which they never showed up for, and all day yesterday they're saying, "Hey, come see our AetherCon special. Come see our AetherCon special." Okay, and I know that was nothing but garbage because like hammering us was why I may have been well done, but it was basically just one long criticism of why AetherCon sucks, and I know this because of what they did 48 hours before the convention. Okay. I might as well tell you. I mean, you're senior staff. You should know this. Basically, we sent out a document, an email, okay, with that stuff in the body of the email, October 22nd. Here are some suggestions as to how you build your vendor's booth, right? Basically, and Venus Decoy from Lady Ophelia built hers by scratch, and I liked it, and we discussed, okay, how'd you do this, what'd you do here, and what works, what doesn't work. And so I took a bunch of notes on that, and I formed it into an email, and I sent it out to all of the other vendors. Here's how you do it.
Yeah. And
this was sent out October 22nd, titled AetherCon, Vendors Booth Suggestions. And I sent it to Michael Ovarhola, who is the head dude over there at Skirmisher Publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And he just let it sit in his inbox. He didn't even bloody open the damn thing. And so a week before the con, we sent out the same information on a PDF, but we added a paragraph at the bottom. Okay, here's what you need to do at the day of the con for us to hook you up. Right? That was the only thing that was different, was like day of the event. Okay, everything else was the same. Robert Grosvenor, who had to build the booth, who was a partner in Skirmisher, then got on Facebook and just hammered us.
Really?
Just, oh, Jesus, this is just horrible instructions, so vague, and I don't know what I'm doing here, within 48 hours. And it's like, we sent you this almost a month ago. Why are you now coming down on us for this? Right? And I talked to Michael, and I said, what's going on here? We sent this to you guys like almost a month ago. This is, what are you talking about? You got it on Monday. No, we sent it a month ago. And I told him, October 22nd, look for that email. We don't have any attachments there. It was in the body of the email. Right?
Yeah.
And he found it. And I said, look, all we want is for Robert to take that string of stuff down because it's simply not true. We gave him instructions. He had almost 4 weeks to ask us questions, and he never, you guys, that's on you. That's internal communication. You got the email. You never passed it on to the guy who needed to design the booth. That's not on us.
Yeah.
That's on you. And they wouldn't. And Robert kept hammering and hammering. So I finally put a clarification in there and explained exactly what happened. And then Michael said, "Oh, so now you're raising this to a pissing match, are you?" I said, "I've got to defend the brand."
Yeah.
I mean, what do you expect me to do here? What would you do in my place?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you not defend yourself? You know, and so since then, you know, so they hammered me some more, and they hammered AetherCon, and I said, okay, well, look, you know, and they threatened, well, look, if you think we're going to damage your brand so much, why don't you just take off all reference to us, and we won't. And I said, you made a commitment. You know, I'm not going to take that down because I made a commitment to you that I would put that up there, and we live up to our commitments because we take that kind of thing seriously here.
Yeah.
Right. And so I said, you know, and we expect people who make commitments to us to do the same. We expect you to be there. We expect you to be at your panel. And so they basically took advantage of being there to hammer us left, right, and center at every opportunity. They had a guy in our chat room yesterday, Richard T. Balsey, who ostensibly is quote-unquote not a part of Skirmisher Publishing, but he's like a freelancer who's like thick as thieves with them.
Yeah.
Okay, so he can say, well, I'm not a part of Skirmisher Publishing. Yes, you are, dude. No, but name you're a part of Skirmisher Publishing. Right? And it's been basically him, it's basically him, Robert, and Michael, who have just been hammering us. And now they've bled over to Google. You know, and it's like, of course, none of this side of the story has come out.
But the thing is, though, Stephen, is I'm not being funny, but you know, it's not cost them anything. What if they lost apart from just a few hours each per day? They haven't. Realistically, what damage could it have done to their company? Nothing at all.
Oh no, it's not. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the fact that they screwed the pooch, and they wanted someone to blame, and they chose me, and they wouldn't admit it when I proved to them that it was on them.
Yeah.
Right, and and because of that, as I said, you know, I've got to say something here. You know, what choice are you giving me?
Yeah.
All I wanted you to do was take down this string of stuff because it was simply not true. Right? If those instructions were vague, well, no one else in the vendors hall had a problem with that. Everyone else was able to get their booth up without a problem.
Yeah.
Right? No one complained. Only you complained. And only you were the ones who said, well, we only got this 3 days ago. No, you had this almost a month. Right? And so now they're hammering us left, right, and center. You know, Ballsy was in there last night, and I just completely ignored him. I didn't want to get into it. And I think that's the play here. I don't think a flame war or anything by me with them it will accomplish anything.
That's it, mate. It's just not even worth thinking about. Just ignore it and just move on, and just carry on as you are. It's not even worth getting wound up about.
No, I mean, okay. Look, obviously, you know, I'm not totally happy with that situation, but I understand that if they bait me and I rise to that bait, that's totally on me.
Yeah.
I gotta hook up Christian here. Give me a moment.
Okay, mate.
It's good that the artists are showing up. This is really good. A couple of them did not, and I was.
Yeah, there's been a few missing, hasn't there?
Yeah, Anton did not at all.
No. Strange, isn't it?
Not at all. Well, I think he thinks that he is beyond this.
Really?
Yeah, I just and look. Okay, look, his art's damn good. Okay, it is. At the time when I talked to him, you know, when I first talked to him, it was like he was one of the I'd say probably one of the first 6 we recruited. Okay, and okay, that's just obviously see. I mean, and so I can, you know, but he has got a very good art, and it's not a case of him not being able to find work at all. That's not it.
But it's not. You see, the thing is, though, mate, it's not about finding work. This convention. I mean, it's not. I mean, I didn't expect to find work here. If I want work, I'll go and find work. I've got publishers who I could contact and say I need a job, and they give me a job. I know that. You know, I've got contacts out there. To me, it was more about the social side of things. It was more about, you know, getting involved with a convention you can do from your home. do some painting, people can see your painting, network with a few more people. If anything came out of it, fine, but if not, well, no concerns. And I think most of the artists are like that. And none of the artists have come into this thinking they're going to walk away with a dozen, commissions from publishers.
But that was our goal. We wanted to get you guys gigs.
But it's not happened now because I think, for whatever reason, it's not happened. I know that. I mean, I've been speaking to other artists, and to tell the truth, no one's really had many visitors. In fact, the only visitors people tend to get are the other artists popping in to say hello and see how they're getting on. But that's something we need to address for next year.
Well, I think the speed painting might help a bit. I know that we're gonna, massively overdo the. Oh, we have a. Oh, a second. Let's just tell him he's up. Sorry. Darn it! What we were talking about? Damn it!
We were talking about the fact that not many of the artists got many visitors to the booths.
Yeah, and the vendors were also in this that same thing. But the thing is, I think the artists were they're much more okay with it. Because I don't think any of us probably set too high expectations. I mean, I've had a chance to talk with Will O'Brien, with Kai from Germany, because I actually popped in onto their booths, and their booths were working fine. And there was only myself visiting them throughout the 3 hours. But they were quite pragmatic about it. They were like, look, they're just starting off in the business. They've never done a convention before. They like the idea of it. And even though they had no visitors and they've not gained jobs out of this, they were like, oh, we've enjoyed ourselves and we'll come back next year. And maybe next year, when everyone knows more about the convention, things will change. Yeah, well, I think I've already said to you, the first 2 years are all going to be all about brand and team building.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you've got to look at that. But I think what's happened is I think other artists maybe tried on the Friday, they had some technical issues, and they've just gone, you know what, I'm not doing this, and they've pulled out completely without letting us know. While others, such as Anton, have just never turned up, not turned up to the stints.
Yeah, well, let's see. Oh, gee whiz. Hey, where did I? Oh, well, I closed that window by accident. Darn. Okay, there we go. I'm just gonna go down the list of the people. Okay, let's see. Chumley dropped out the day before.
Did he really?
Yep, day before. Couldn't handle the tech. Andre was here.
He had a problem, Andre. It's a shame.
Will's been here. Axel, I have not seen.
No, he's not been here.
Anton, I've not seen. Patrick's here. Kai's here. Paul Abrams has been here.
He struggled. Paul struggled. He's not been had a chance to get on properly.
Who?
Paul Abrams.
No, he's been here.
Was he on last night?
Well, he was here yesterday.
Ah, right, okay.
Okay. Ian has been here. Jordy's been here. Aaron was here, and then he was not here this morning. Christian's been here. Eric's been here. You've been here. Sam's been here. Okay, so out of those, to see how many people, Brent said maybe next year. Sam said maybe next year. Sam is not getting a call back. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, and Brent is sort of on top to do a wallpaper. I know he had some really difficult times. Personally, this year, I might grant him a reprieve. Axel, I'm not inviting back because